Good afternoon. I'm Dennis Galucki. Welcome to the 489th Imagine Greater Buffalo program and our 111th virtual program hosted by our wonderful Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. Thanks so much for joining us today. This program is created by ImagineLifelongLearning.com and the Center for the Study of Art, Architecture, History, and Nature, or C-SAAHN, as I pronounce the acronym. Now, before we get started, just a little housekeeping. Everyone watching will be muted and your video turned off. If you have a question or comment, please type it into the chat box and we'll go through them at the end of the presentation. We are recording this program so you can watch it again later on the Downtown Central Library's Facebook page and YouTube channels, and we certainly hope you share the link with your friends and networks. Now, on to our featured speaker, Samina Raja. Samina Raja is a professor of urban planning, principal investigator of the Food Systems Planning and Healthy Communities Lab, and co-director of UB's Community for Global Health Equity. She focuses on understanding the role of planning and policy in building sustainable food systems and healthy communities. She is a founding partner of Seeding Resilience, a Black, Indigenous, and people of color-led community coalition in response to COVID-19. As well as a member of the New York State Agriculture and Markets Diversity and Racial Equity Work Group. In addition, she is a member of the American Planning Association, the Association of Collegiate Schools of Planning, and the Buffalo Food Equity Network, which focuses on food justice in the city of Buffalo. For additional context, ever since the summer of 2021, the Imagine Greater Buffalo program on the fourth Tuesday of the month has tried to focus on the notion of sustainability. And last month, on the fourth Tuesday, we had folks from the Massachusetts Avenue Project and the farm manager, the executive director and the farm manager speak. Today's presentation is really a continuation of that program, because that's where I met Dr. Samina Raja. Samina, take it from there.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for this invitation. Before I get formally started, I want to make sure that my screen is visible because I do intend on sharing some slides. So please bear with me as I switch to the slides. In the meantime, because I will talk about food, I tell people this is your time to get your caffeine and your beverage ready to accompany your afternoon entertainment from Samina Raja. So please bear with me.
We see it.
All right, great. Thank you for that introduction. I am delighted to be here. I agreed to speak here quite a while ago, and I appreciate the kindness and the organization of the library system. I always begin by saying that public libraries are a public infrastructure that are not valued and recognized the way they ought to be. And I was just delighted to get this invitation to join this conversation. So just happy to be here. I am going to talk about food systems, and it's a phrase that I'm sure you heard about last week from our colleagues at the Massachusetts Avenue Project. My comments are going to take in a particular direction that are going to focus on where does equity fit in if we all share the aspiration of having a healthy, wealthy, and sustainable community. Before I do that, I want to make sure that I offer my gratitude to the organizers of this program, but also recognize that the work and the comments that I will make today are not just those that I am presenting. This work represents a large coalition of people, including the Buffalo Equity Network members, colleagues from around the country, including at Johns Hopkins University, also funders and sponsors that have made this work possible, and most recently, the Moving Forward Together opportunity from Ralph C. Wilson Foundation, Western New York Foundation, and Southern Tier West. Without that work, we would not be able to do what I do. So to contextualize what you will hear, it may be a little important to know that there is a particular approach to my comments that you will hear about. I am at the University at Buffalo, as you heard in the introduction. I do research that is co-produced with community partners. It varies across disciplines. Yes, I'm in urban planning, but I work with geographers, health scientists, computer scientists, engineers, the gamut. We engage in action research, which means that the research is translated into some work in the community. We stick around for the long haul. I have worked with Massachusetts Avenue Project for about 20 years. That is not a comment on my age. And then finally, we believe in systems change. So we learn from communities that are innovating. For example, the communities that you are seeing on the slide from the West Coast, Seattle to the East Coast. But then we think about how do we translate that into opportunities so you are seeing places that are lab work. Most of this learning is really grounded in the city of Buffalo. So that's what my talk will be about. What you will hear from me today is a little bit about language, because I'd like to reduce confusion when we talk about food equity and food systems. I'll talk about some context in the city of Buffalo and dive into the east side a little bit. And because I'm aspirational, I have hope, I would like to talk about where I draw my hope from, which is community networks and community action, and then conclude with some steps forward and hopefully have time for conversation. So a little bit about language. When I say the phrase food system, which is what the substance of this talk is about, I'm really talking about the infrastructure that often becomes invisible, which is in gray right now on your slide. That gray infrastructure is our food system, how food travels from farm to plate, to our plates. It's because farmers are growing food, somebody is processing it, somebody is turning it into wholesale, aggregating it, somebody is moving it to retail, to our supermarkets and grocery stores, then it ends up in our home. That, in short, is the phrase food system that I will use during the conversation. Sometimes also we say food environment. For this to be sustainable, equitable, and healthy, we have to really make it visible up and down the chain. Too often, the focus is only on food retail because that's what we encounter. We love our Wegmans, for example, in Buffalo. So the language is, we have to understand people's experience in the food system. We also have to understand the supply side of the system, if you will, food retail as an example. So I'll go through some of those considerations before we dive into our possibilities for Buffalo. So on the people side, I often hear people talking about food and pointing. When I say what comes to mind, they'll talk about their grandmother's recipe for chocolate chip cookies. They'll talk about their history, their culture, their preference for food, and sometimes they might talk about income. But it might also be about if they're holding 2 jobs and they don't have time to cook. They might talk about culinary skills. Do they know how to can? And then all of that together sometimes is the sorts of things that impact our diet and health-related behavior. So food and people's experiences with food are quite complex. A concern that I have is the way that we talk about food in the United States sometimes reduces it to one thing. Do those people eat well? Why are they eating unhealthy food? And then choices are really reduced to a very narrow band. So I'm inviting people who are dialing in today to think about food in its most expansive sense, because the more we do that in Buffalo, the more likely we are to move towards a more equitable, sustainable, and wealthy food system and life in this city. So complex. The second piece is on the, what we might call the demand side, but I will get to there in a minute, just to capture it. Given that landscape or what people's food experiences are, there are the less than desirable outcomes. There's hunger, there's malnutrition, there's community food insecurity. These are different elements of the negative side of our food experiences, but please hold on to the complexity and joy of what a food-related experience is for us. Then those experiences rub up against the less than desirable food retail environments that we experience in the city of Buffalo, in particular neighborhoods. More on that later. We might experience high food prices. We might experience the absence of supermarkets. We might experience all kinds of stuff that doesn't allow us to lead full lives around our food, joy, celebration, healthy food. All of that is simply not possible. And the most egregious of that came to light on May 14th, when there was a shooting by a white supremacist on the east side, when we all learned that the one supermarket that was accessible to people for their daily living was also the site of the ending of their life in ways that is not okay. So that conversation came to light against the landscape of a really undesirable food environment. There's confusion because of this. People combine all conversations about food into one single piece of factoid. People aren't eating well. And I go back to that again and again, because what I am trying to do is to unpack that our experiences in the food environment, whether they're good or they're bad or harmful, is a combination of different things. It's what people experience on the demand side and what is in our environment, which could be high food prices, etc. All of those rub up against in what we experience in a retail store. Another term that we might use, or I will use later, is that the combination of that leads to phrases like food inaccess or food inequity, which means that people can't live sustainable, wealthy, abundant lives vis-a-vis food and nutrition. And then the last term is that when that experience is by design, I use the term, following other colleagues in the community and scholars, the term food apartheid, which I'm happy to explain in conversation. So there is confusion because we mix up these terms without unpacking what is happening in Buffalo. That said, I'm going to dive into the story. So our story, our city story, and our region is really one of inequity, accumulation, and food apartheid. In order for me to present that story, we needed to get to those terms. So I'm going to offer a county-wide view first. There is a tendency every time I'm asked to talk about food to talk about what is absent. I would suggest today that we all collectively in our city and region also think about where are those resources going. It's not as if there isn't food. There is more food produced in the United States than ever before, historically speaking. There is more food in the United States to feed every hungry people. So it's not a question of absence. It's really a question of accumulation and inequity. So let me proceed. Many of you might have seen this redlining map from 1937. That white arrow on the right side of your screen is Main Street. And on the east of Main Street is where there was a considerable amount of disinvestment that spilled over into the food retail industry as well. And we saw a departure of food businesses from the east side. And you know what that present looks like, which is absence, but I will share some additional data. So that's historic context for some of what we see today. So move fast forward to 2008 in the interest of time. If you were to go to predominantly white neighborhoods in Erie County, you will see a certain number of supermarkets and grocery stores. And I will pick one intersection in particular, for example, since these are people from Erie County, Sheridan and Bailey, for example, or where Trader Joe's is located, where Whole Foods Market is located, where Wegmans is located. Within the vicinity, there's a lot of supermarkets aggregated. So it's not the case that we don't have food in our county and region. They are accumulated in particular areas. By comparison, if you go to predominantly other kinds of neighborhoods, so neighborhoods of color or Black neighborhoods, the share of supermarkets in our county drops. The clarification that I want to offer here really quickly is it's important for me to communicate, and I hope for you to understand that these data of prevalence are not about poor Black neighborhoods and wealthy white neighborhoods. They are about comparable, economically comparable neighborhoods, and we still see a persistence of difference in amenities and supermarket food-related amenities, which is why I point to the data as an evidence of something else happening besides sheer economics. And hence, why it is better to refer to it as by design, and I'll come to that. Conversely, if you look at convenience stores, which sell junk food primarily, you will see that there is a lower prevalence in white neighborhoods compared to Black neighborhoods. In fact, the prevalence is 1.37 times higher. And again, these are comparable neighborhoods based on some regression modeling that my lab has done. So that disinvestment pattern continues. So fast forward to 2019, on the right side, you are seeing the map that shows the areas in darker red that do not have supermarkets and grocery stores, combined with lower vehicular access. And the darker reds are where the disinvestment pattern is higher. And to turn it around, the presence of Tops on the east side, for example, was really the result of a sustained fight to change this landscape. So keep in mind that the historic landscape continues, but communities are responding. So with that, I'm going to dive into, against that larger regional landscape, into the east side of Buffalo. On the east side, for colleagues who are dialed in, this is not going to be a surprise. We're talking about the east of the city of Buffalo. And on the map is the location of the Jefferson Avenue Tops, where the May 14th tragedy happened. That east side contains a significantly lower portion of citywide resources, which I showed earlier on my slides. I thought it might be useful for people to visualize what that means. The east side is actually a big portion of the city of Buffalo. It's not a tiny area, it's a large portion. But within that, the areas that you are seeing in darker gray are not within walking distance or half a mile of a supermarket. The only areas that are, they look like boiled eggs or fried eggs on the screen. And one of them, of course, as you know, is the Tops on Jefferson. A good portion of the east side is also farther than a mile of a supermarket. So the gray areas that you are seeing now, people are farther than a mile and most certainly cannot walk with groceries. And you'll see why that becomes important shortly. This data is not relevant if you have cars. It becomes more relevant if you don't. So in the neighborhoods on the east side that are outlined in gold, I'd like you to see what the levels of food insecurity are in that area. 42% of households in a survey that we did reported food insecurity. Why is that meaningful? Because nationally, it's 10 to 11% of households report that data. Let me pause. 10% food insecurity nationally, 42% among the households that we surveyed on the east side. That is tied to poor mental health rates on the east side. The data that I'm showing you is prior to the shooting. So generally speaking, people who are food insecure report high rates of trauma and mental health. But then after the shooting, we had people on the east side that were not leaving their homes to go procure food because of the trauma. So conditions that are already difficult became worse. On the east side, prior to the shooting, people relied on Tops. Tops is in fact a primary destination for where people said that they shopped. Then they shop at Walmart, then at Broadway Market, then at discount stores. So you see the data on the slide. So in other words, people are both reliant on what is there, but they also have to overcome what is in their neighborhood using all kinds of strategies. So there's limited access for sure to diverse food sources. It becomes important because households do not have cars, and it's important to visually see what that means. The areas that are darker blue are the areas that do not have access to households in those neighborhoods, and there's quite a few. And in the survey, we ask what percentage of people, households, have no access to a vehicle, and it is 45%. So that is a picture of Buffalo and then also of the East Side that juxtaposes accumulation regionally and inequity on the East Side. That said, it is important to know what people on the East Side and in the city of Buffalo are already doing. And some of what our research team does is documents that. So in the interest of time, I will summarize that and happy to talk more at the end. First of all, there is a robust network and history of food justice work on the East Side. The first person who launched a vegetarian business, food retail, healthy food retail business in our area was Ruby Butts, who launched a health food store on the East Side. So this is not new, but it's important to understand that in the ecosystem of the food system, there are leaders on the East Side that are building a food system. We have Urban Fruits and Veggies as an example. That is our city's Black-owned urban farm. It is on the East Side that is growing food. We have Urban Fruits and Veggies also delivering to people, including in conditions of crisis. We have, in addition, Freedom Gardens, which is a program that helps people grow their own food at their homes and therefore increasing their access to food. We have African Heritage Food Co-op, which is a aggregator, but also a retailer that also links our farmers and people, the customers together. Then, of course, we also have the example of other organizations that step in emergencies, and that one important one to know is Feed Buffalo. And for clarification, Feed Buffalo is different than Feed More of Western New York. They both have a different role, but Feed Buffalo is a space led by Drea Denor, which believes in serving food, organic, healthy, sustainable food with dignity to people in crises. So that is an emergency response for people directly. And then, of course, you all know about the Tops Market. I put Tops Market there to make sure that people understand that while there is an absence of grocery stores, people on the East Side have been taking care of each other and building resources and support for generations, and certainly that remains true today. So against that landscape, there's a lot to digest and a lot that I have thrown out. I'd like to bring the conversation to a close by offering a way forward given the bleak scenario that I began with, and then the hopeful responses that I shared with. Then what is the way forward? So in order for me to explain the way forward, it is necessary for me to say that change takes time, first of all, but that doesn't mean that stops us from immediately engaging in incremental actions as long as they are in the same upward direction, and hence the image that you see on the screen. Oftentimes in communities, when I'm asked to deliver a talk based on data and research, I face two kinds of reactions. One reaction is, that is overwhelming. What do I do with that? And the second is, I need to know what to do today or tomorrow. And so my invitation to the listeners in this program and in this conversation is to think about the possibility that both can be true. We can understand the complexity and overwhelming nature of the problem in front of us, which is structural, complex, historic, deeply layered, and then still be able to take incremental actions. Taking immediate actions is somewhat harmful if the direction of those actions puts us on the wrong highway or in the wrong trail in the forest. So if we are lost, we still need to take steps to get out of the woods. Small step, necessary, but it needs to be in the right direction rather than going in circles. So the list that I have, because I think that the only thing some of us will remember is the list at the end, is really with that spirit in mind that we need to take immediate action to build a wealthy, sustainable community. But we also need to know where we are headed, which fortunately for this program is focused on sustainability, wealth building, and all of that. So with that in mind, I'm going to move forward with the first one. We cannot move towards an equitable community infrastructure or a wealthy, sustainable community, more broadly speaking, in the city of Buffalo, if we continue to ignore the assets that we have in our community. So whether you're dialing in as a reader and a user of the public library system, as a researcher who's really curious about this series, or somebody looking back at this work, 3 years down or 30 years down, it's important to recognize that there were assets on the east side and in the city of Buffalo, and they continue to be here. And if we are going to all work together in the upward direction and together, we can come from different routes, but the general direction is the same. We must begin with building on what already works in our community. So that's the first. The second is, by necessity, that also means paying attention to history. And in food systems work, this is especially important. I gave examples of a Black-led urban farm in the city of Buffalo. I gave examples of African Heritage Food Co-op, also a Black-led food aggregation business. It's important for our audience to understand that both of those examples draw on Black history. They draw on Black cooperative movements. In fact, some of you might have heard Alex Wright say, anything less than ownership is unacceptable. I think those are the words he uses. And that comes from the long tradition of Black cooperative economics and the model that he is using on the East Side. Some of you might not be aware that even the idea of a land trust has a long history in Black history. So the first land trust was in the state of Georgia, established by Charles Sherrod and Shirley Sherrod in the wake and as part of the civil rights movement, because Black farmers and Black farm workers were losing their land in that period of time, and they fought to establish the first Black-owned community land trust in the United States. And in the planning school and planning departments and scholarship, we talk about land trusts, but very few of us understand the history of where even land trusts came from. So it's important to understand that. A second example connected to history. Those of you who are history enthusiasts, this is not going to be new for you, but it behooves me to say that one of the early examples of community development happened in the same time when Jane Jacobs was in the time of Jane Jacobs, but it was not Jane Jacobs. So I suspect many of the people dialing in might have heard about Jane Jacobs, who wrote The Death and Life of Great American Cities. But how many of you know about the work of Fannie Lou Hamer, who was in the same period of time, who was an activist, a teacher, a leader, who fought for voting rights in Mississippi, and in fact launched what is popularly in Black food work known as the pig farm. She set up a cooperative for Black farm workers, then realized that farm workers needed housing and education. Then she set up housing to go with it, then schools, then a sewing facility. So wraparound services require us to look at models that are historic. Oops, sorry. The third is based on what I shared.
Samina, Let me just interrupt you for 1 second. We're bumping up against our time. constraints, and I wanted to get some Q&A in. Can you show us did you say there's 10 of these items that you want?
Five. I put them up.
And my point is I want to bring you back down the road so that we can go more in depth, because you're adding so much texture to this discussion that I certainly haven't heard before, and I want this added to it. But I do want to stay true to the roughly half-hour time limit that we have in this program. Can you just give us a wrap-up sentence? You're showing us the 5 points. Maybe wrap it up, and then we can open it up. And I'm going to lead, by the way, I see JD Hartman is on. He's our co-host for the sustainability. So JD, I'll offer you the opportunity for the first question if you get ready for that. Go ahead.
I can wrap it up super fast. Focus on solutions that tackle both supply and demand. Again, look at community vetted projects that are both systemic and structural, so we can focus on the system in its entirety. And then the final one is to focus on fairness, both in the processes that we use, but also to look at the fairness and outcomes. If we keep putting money into projects and we don't see movement in food security on the east side, we got to step back and ask why. That's my closing line.
Very, very good. Melissa, would you free up JD's audio so he can be part of this discussion? My thanks right off the bat for this in-depth dive. Here is the point, I think, from my standpoint, I want to leave. I see things here on the west side, the Massachusetts Avenue project. This was last fall when we met. And there are attempts at getting something started. What you seem to bring to the table was the university's capabilities to see the larger picture and point to not just what is, but policy to start to change it at most fundamental levels. Is that a fair observation of what you bring to the table, literally, of this food discussion here in Western New York?
That's a great question. I would say that I see my job at a public university as somebody who documents the assets and the successes in our community, but also sometimes to shine the spotlight on what people are unwilling to talk about or perhaps don't have the data for. So yes, so I focus on the east side today because I have encountered a lot of people don't know about what is happening on the east side. That is certainly one of the jobs that I hold in the lab, and also work with those partners to help them think about what they need in terms of data. So a lot of what my lab does is actually provide data back to the community, but also provide workshops or technical or training assistance as they may ask for.
Good. JD, do you have any quick questions?
Thank you, Dr. Raja. You know, I'm going to defer to Melissa to see if any of the participants have a question. If not, I do. So Melissa, anyone type in?
No one has asked anything, so feel free, JD.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Raja. Again, fascinating stuff. I mean, it's a little dizzying to hear of the community involvement from, MAP to the African Heritage Co-op to Urban Fruits and Veggies, the Providence Farm Collective. Really, it's encouraging. It's moving, humbling too. One thing I didn't hear about was government, which was refreshing. Thank you. What role do you think local government has in moving this, equitable food infrastructure forward? Maybe none. Maybe stay out of the way. But what are your thoughts?
The answer is not none. So let's start there.
Good.
I deleted those slides because I knew we had the 30-minute mark. I would say that all levels of government have a responsibility. At the local government level, which is the space that I work in, there is a significant responsibility because local government, by definition, its job is to provide health and well-being and welfare for its residents. Mm-hmm. So in my judgment, the city of Buffalo, the county of Erie, both have responsibilities, and colleagues there have executed some things, but a lot more needs to be done. We are, compared to the nation, quite behind. And it doesn't need to be that way because we have models and practices and examples of doing it right. Immediately, I would say the city of Buffalo has an opportunity to invest in urban agriculture and invest in different components of the food system. The county is already thinking about it, and county and city together have an entity called the Food Policy Council of Buffalo and Erie County. That council needs greater strength and support to enact some of the policies. Give another very specific example. We don't have the appropriate tax code for land that would tax land differently for agricultural land versus commercial land. So farmers end up paying or thinking about paying at the same rates as other forms, and there New York State has a role. So there are more than 300 policies in the United States that show how local governments can strengthen. I can't detail all of them, but I can point people to a website called growingfoodconnections.org, and that has a database to show examples besides the one that I have just mentioned.
Good. JD, the premise of this sustainable theme since the summer of 2021 has really been to imagine a healthy, wealthy, and sustainable community. And I appreciated you putting that up as the first slide. What the notion, and JD, you have represented the private sector group that uniquely exists here in Buffalo, the Western New York Sustainable Business Roundtable. But government at all levels, it seems, has to be a player in sustainability, and the private sector and the not-for-profit sector. And then the individuals kind of mesh it all together based on their particular positions and impassioned desire to improve this. Your stat was alarming relative to the rest of the nation. It's one thing to think, well, this is here, but it's everywhere. And then suddenly you say, we worry about Super Bowls and trophies in sports. We need to worry about trophies in daily life. And the trophy of just undoing the inequity is the starting point. And that's what I trust the times are about. The library, I would think this is a learning process, an awareness process by the community. And I would hope the library, with its 37 branches in Erie County, can be part of that education process. Frankly, this is a component of that, the Imagine series, especially the archive pieces and the promotion of those pieces so that we help everybody get on the same page, literally. Beyond that, there's only one of you doing as many presentations, I'm sure, as you can, but tell me I'm wrong, that there's more of you. There's duplicates of you and triplicates of you. That'll make us finish up this program on a high note. Go ahead.
You don't need duplicates. I work in an ecosystem of scholars, which is lovely, which is why I began with that slide. So I invite you to look at the work of Cameron Herman, Emmanuel Frimpong-Boama, so many colleagues that do this work, both in the city of Buffalo and nationally, and happy to connect the libraries with them. But please know that none of the work that I do was done alone. The survey data, for example, was generated by Dr. Eli Mui at Johns Hopkins, who has lived and worked in Buffalo before she moved to Baltimore. So there are absolutely other people. I wish the tribe grows, but the tribe is there, and I invite you to connect with them.
Well, that's a good invitation and a good way to leave this particular program. We'll get you back, and I'll mention to invite you to submit some people that you think would be good additional speakers, both for the fall and going beyond that. All right, on this very subject. Well, Dr. Samina Raja, thank you very much for a great summation of of a very in-depth problem. Now, we thank you all for showing up today, and that's greatly appreciated. We will be back next week when we join Dr. Barbara Seals Nevergold. And she has a great story to tell us. So I trust you'll be able to tune in and join us then. Folks, thanks for supporting this program. I'm Dennis Galucki. Be well and good day.
So Samina, we hope to have Allison from Urban Fruits and Veggies on in our May 30th show. So I know you two are co-collaborators in many ways. And once again, thank you for the wonderful presentation.
JD, I'll send the invite for that. That's the person you recommended?
Yeah.
An email,
Yeah.
good. That'll be a good follow-up.
Yeah, really nice. Great. Okay, all. Wonderful day.